from the second book of Samuel. At the turn of the year, when kings go out on campaign, David sent Joab along with his officers and the army of Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. David, however, remained in Jerusalem. Just a warning for you guys for this podcast has some kind of heavy topics with it, so it's not really fit for younger ears. So if you have people around you who are of a younger age, then you may want to pause the podcast and put some earphones on. Welcome back, everybody, to the Catholic Pleb podcast. Today we're going to be taking a look at David and looking at the nature of sin and just dissecting this the second book of Samuel that we're going to be reading today. So as I mentioned before, we're in the second book of Samuel. And the first thing we note, just in that short paragraph, this is not going to be all the readings, but this will be where we start, is when it talks about like the changing of the seasons. So beforehand, David has lived quite an adventurous life where he has been attacked by Saul, and he's been sought out by Saul. He's come from his former life of being a shepherd boy through his life of being a warrior. Now he's established as the king of Judah and Israel, which is at this point in time interchangeable because they're just one nation. They're the 12 tribes in one nation, and then we'll see later on as we go through different scriptures that kingdom breaks into two kingdoms. But for now, when we're talking about David and his story here, we see that there's a changing of the season, that David now is solidly the king of Israel. And in this new season, it says that when the kings go out to campaign, David sends out Joab, which is significant because what's happening is he's not really taking up his obligations now as the king. As it says, the kings go out to make war. And David is not doing that. He's secure. He's taking a life of luxury and a life of frivolous indulgence, with just neglecting his duty and sending somebody else to do his job. So we see that this is our first thing that we know about sin, is that whenever we take not leisure for a restful period in order to engage us back in our duties better, more fully, and more attentively, but whenever we take unnecessary rest and just get into listlessness or get into sloth where we don't feel like working, so we give ourselves this respite from work that turns into this long delayed, or I should say extended period of not fulfilling the work that we have to do. It creates the opportunity for sin to come about in temptation. All right. So, we begin with David remaining in Jerusalem, and from there we go on, and I'm going to go back into reading 2 Samuel. One evening, David rose from his siesta and strolled about on the roof of the palace. All right. So there we go. That's another key and kind of an invitation to see what's going on in David right now. Not only is he staying back, and not only is he not taking up his office as king and, fighting for his people, but we see that he's taking a nap. He's really indulging kind of a lazy lifestyle. And then from there, what happens is he goes up and he strolls on the rooftop of his palace. Now, this maybe could be even an act of pride where he wants to marvel at the kingdom that he has. He wants to give himself the self-compliments of things that God has earned for him and through him. Of course, David worked with God's grace and has established this kingdom, and this comes from, but ultimately this comes from God. So we have David strolling about after taking a nap, and then what happens? We have the opportunity of sin. It says, from the roof he saw a beautiful woman bathing. She was, I didn't quote that properly. It says, from the roof he saw a woman bathing, who was very beautiful. David had inquiries made about the woman and was told, she is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Okay, we see another worthy point of sin. All right, you have a lazy lifestyle giving you and putting you into the opportunity of sin. Then you have this increasing laziness. You know, he takes a nap, and he strolls on the rooftop of the palace. And then we see the temptation, the sin, when David looks out and he sees this beautiful woman. But he doesn't look away, you know. And temptation, immediately you're offered with a choice of, what are you going to do? Are you going to fixate and focus on the passions that you want? Or are you going to turn away and look towards God? We see that David, not only does he look at this woman, but then afterwards, he holds the image of this woman in his mind. And what comes about is he just fixates on it to the point where he actually has inquiries sent out. And then he learns that this woman is already married. So the second, or I don't know if I'd say quite second, but the next worthy point that I'd like to really focus in on is when we dwell within the thing that we are being tempted with, and we do not flee from it, the sin takes a hold on a part of us and becomes harder to resist. And then returning back to 2 Samuel, then David sent messengers to her. She came to him and had relations with her, he had relations with her at a time when she was just purified after her monthly period. She then returned to her house, but the woman had conceived and sent the information to David, I am with child. David therefore sent a messenger to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. Joab sent Uriah to David. When he came, David questioned him about Joab, the soldiers, and how the war was going. And Uriah answered that all was well. David then said to Uriah, go down to your house and bathe your feet. Uriah left the palace, and a portion was sent out after him from the king's table. But Uriah slept at the entrance of the royal palace with the officers of his lord. And he did not go down to his own house. David was told that Uriah had not gone home. So he said to Uriah, have you not come from a journey? Why then did you not go down to your own house? Uriah answered David, the ark and Israel and Judah are lodged in tents, and my lord Joab and your majesty's servants are encamped in the open field. Can I go home to eat and drink and to sleep with my wife? Let's pause there for a second. All right, so we've gone from David fixating on his sin, and this fixation draws him deeper and deeper into the want for his sin, and then he commits his sin. And now we have David trying to cover up everything. Right? Uriah's wife is pregnant, and one of his ways he's trying to skirt his the consequences of his sin is he's trying to get Uriah to go home to his wife so that the pregnancy will be unknown that it's from David, so that hopefully Uriah would sleep with his wife. And we see that that's not happening. We see a very interesting dichotomy that Uriah is actually what David is not being. He's being a faithful servant to his Lord. Now, when it talks about, Uriah says about his Lord, Joab, it's lowercase l, so it's more of like lords as in, a hierarchy of a government or a governmental system. So just kind of a side note, going back to what's going on here, we have Uriah, who is being faithful. He knows that his comrades are intense, and they are waging wars, and he sees it completely unfit for himself to take these luxuries and neglect his duty, that he wishes to be in solidarity with his friends who are fighting, and in solidarity with his countrymen. So we see that David, who is caught up in sin and he's trying to hide the sin, and then you see Uriah, who's a very rightly ordered man, who is refusing to take luxuries into his life, and that he's trying to live an honorable life. And you see how these two, when they're interacting with each other, they keep kind of crossing paths, and the sin is just not able to rest and be covered up. And as we move on and we talk more, we see Uriah. I'm trying to figure out where my place is. I lost it. We're just going to start here. It says, this is Uriah talking, and he's going on. And he's saying, "Can I go home to eat and drink and to sleep with my wife? As the Lord lives and as you live, I will do no such thing." Then David said to Uriah, "Still stay here today also, and I shall dismiss you tomorrow." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day. On the day following, David summoned him, he ate and drank with David, who made him drunk. But in the evening he went out to sleep on his bed among his Lord's servants, and did not go down to his home. So we're going to pause here. And we see again, David is continuously trying to cover up his sin. He's continuously trying to hide what he has done. So he's trying to put Uriah in this position where he's going to lose his senses. And David's choice here is wine, and he's trying to make him drunk so that he will go back to his wife and just indulge himself. But we see that Uriah is such a just man that even in his drunkenness, he seeks the righteousness, the righteous path, where he doesn't want to indulge himself even when he has his faculties diminished. And we see the next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, which he sent by Uriah. In it he directed, "Place Uriah up on the front, where the fighting is fierce, then pull back and leave him to be struck down dead." So Joab was besieging the city, and assigned Uriah to a place where he knew the defenders were strong. When the men of the city made sorties against Joab, some officers of David's army fell, and among them Uriah the Hittite died. When the wife of Uriah heard that her husband had died, she mourned her lord. But once the mourning was over, David sent for her and brought her into his house. She became his wife and bore him a son, but the Lord was displeased with David and with what David had done. All right, so the last thing that I really want to focus on here that is just so cruel is that the letter that is carrying the instructions for Uriah's death to Joab, we can see that David is just so lost in his sin that he makes Uriah carry his own death sentence. He gives the letter to Uriah and he brings it to Joab because he has full trust in David. And that's just such a, in the selfishness that David is trying to cover up his mistakes, he's doing some incredibly cruel things. And this is very cruel indeed. Okay, so with that, we see kind of the completion of this cycle of David's temptation and his sin that he has. That, he goes from seeking rest to then indulging in that rest, and then having the opportunity of sin, then fixating on his sin. And from there, he becomes so enthralled with the sin that he ends up choosing it. And the consequence of his sin is that it could be quite scandalous for him. He's gotten another man's wife pregnant. So he seeks to cover his sin. So this is also a very worthy point of just, you don't even only have the sin itself There are the repercussions from the sin, and then the hiding of the sin that also enthralls you within more sin, because we have David becoming an adulterer in the first half, and then afterwards, by the time we're done, David becomes a murderer. So we see that sin leads itself to more sin. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom with this podcast, and I don't want to be too negative, but I think it's important to really examine the different points of interest with sin so that you can know how to combat it, so that you can understand where you're at and how to react, because there's always a path to redemption. David, when he's being too indulgent and he's avoiding his tasks, has the opportunity to once again take up his work and thereby remove the opportunity of sin. Then, when David encounters the opportunity of sin, he has at his disposal God always at hand that he can pray to, and he can flee from his sin there. Then, when he is realizing that he is within his heart already committing these sins, he can put them away and stop fixating on them. And that is another opportunity to flee from sin. But even after he does sin, he has the opportunity to seek redemption and forgiveness by not trying to cover it up. And we find that ultimately, especially in the next reading that we'll be going into, hopefully next week, we'll see about the time frame on that one, that his sin is not hidden, that it stands before the Lord, and the Lord will make his sin known, and that there are repercussions, and the Lord of justice will bring justice. So I wanted to share this with you because I wanted to really dive into those natures and the mechanics of sin and how it works within us, and also point out that when we enter into the path of sin and we go down and it leads us to more sin, we become cruel and we become quite ugly as a people. We see David, and he goes from a man of extreme righteousness to a man who is harboring adulterous thoughts, to a man who is an adulterer, to a man who is a murderer. And we see that this image of this man who is after God's very own heart has now been altered, and he's become disfigured, and he's no longer this righteous kingly figure. He's lost his stature and his I don't know if I would say glory, but he's lost the beauty of his person. So with that, we see the different mechanics of sin. We see that kind of the economy of sin that we have with David. And we see the different opportunities that we can take to avoid it as well. At some point, I've been reading the Philokalia, and I want to share that with you guys because it's very beautiful, and it really talks a lot about these different natures of sin and different types of sin, and how they have different effects, and they have the different temptations actually have different remedies for the temptations. So hopefully at some point I can get that to you. But for now, thank you for listening. For now, I hope that you found that this was somewhat helpful to you guys. And for now, I will have to leave you, and I hope that you please share this podcast with other people, and please like and subscribe to the podcast. Trying to grow the channel right now. It's fairly small, but it has some momentum, so I would like to please encourage and ask and request you guys to please continue to share this podcast. And if you have anything for me that I can do to improve on my delivery of these things, or if you have particular topics that you'd like me to talk about, please, there is an email. It's Catholic Pleb, not plebs with an S, but just pleb, at gmail.com. Please email me there, and I'd be happy to hear your advice. God bless you, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.